This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Eleanor. How's it going?
It's going great. And I wanted to tell you how I've been thinking about this. I am so excited about these conversations we've been having because I can't have them with everybody. And when I found you, you said, yeah, I'm interested in that. And so thank you for being my conversation partner.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you. I love talking about this stuff. And I'm not usually a talkative person, but when it comes to this health geek stuff,
you're doing it.
It's right up my alley.
And I wonder how many people out in our audience, are like you and me, don't have people to talk to about things they want to read or learn. So I'm hoping we're finding some of those people and making connections, aren't you?
Yes. Well, and I've heard some feedback, which I just want to say I really appreciate those who have given us feedback that they've enjoyed the podcast, that it's given them some cliff notes of books, and it's given some inspiration on what books they maybe want to read. And that's what,
It gets us going, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. I mean, we enjoy talking about this, but also hope that it's very helpful to you out there listening. So,
well, in that case, let's tell them about this book that you and I have just finished reading called Healthy Gut, Healthy You, by Dr. Michael Ruscio. I believe that might be how you say his name. He is a doctor of chiropractic, and he has another degree in kinesiology, maybe a bachelor in kinesiology.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting. I'm a little analytical, and so I always say, okay, let's look at the book and let's see who published it, and who is the guy that wrote it, and should we have any confidence in what they tell us? And so for that little exercise, I will tell you that this book was published by the guy that wrote it. And I went, oh, that's interesting. So it's not through a publishing house, but it's through his own Ruscio Institute, LLC in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the other thing that I found was kind of interesting was Girl Friday Productions did the artwork. And so this is not published typically. And so I started looking at this with a little skepticism, saying, is this guy selling something? What's this about? And so I looked at the table of contents, which it covers a broad spectrum of interesting things about the gut. He talks about the importance of our gut, diets for optimum gut health, lifestyle and environment, and then tools. And he actually ends up at the end of the book giving you a plan of action. And he does use his products to support that plan of action. So knowing that, I started reading it. And Kristen, what I really liked about his style, it resonated with me. It was a question-answer thing. He would ask a question and then he would answer it. And it was the same question I was going to ask him anyway. Did you have a reaction to his style of writing?
Yeah, I think he is a really good teacher, right? And this read in a way that I was taking a class from him. And I've been interested in gut health for a long time and have dabbled in different books and resources. And this is by far the easiest to read and most comprehensive in that area that I have found.
And every chapter is super well documented with peer-reviewed literature. And the other thing, since you said it's sort of like a class, I would say it'd make a great textbook. And since I taught for many years, I could easily build a course out of this and have my students, engage with me on the content of these things and where they understand stuff and not. And it would just be fun to do a class with this book.
Yeah, well, and he does teach other. So he has a functional medicine practice in, is it Austin, Texas? I believe that's what I wrote down. And he also teaches or leads other functional practitioners on the research. I love how balanced and practical and evidence-based this book is. Like you said, every chapter has a ton of research behind it, but he even has a chapter in itself about how to read and interpret the research and the difference between different types of research articles.
Exactly. The confidence you can have in the conclusions that those research articles put forward. That is very well explained for people who have never had that conversation. This book will give you a good overview of how to evaluate medical reports. And generally, it's nice to have a buddy to talk to about it, because it's like, did you see that too? Yeah, he has started his book with a personal experience, though. Many people who go to medical school tell you how stressful that is. And he experienced stress, and he was working a job as a personal trainer, going to school, and he was doing something else as well. So here is an overachiever, and he's not feeling good. He's fatigued. He's got bloating. He's just worn out. He can't seem to muster his health, and he goes to professional after professional after professional, and they say there's nothing wrong with you. I mean, because he's a personal trainer, so he's doing the exercise, he's eating a healthy diet, he thinks, and he feels like, that this doesn't feel good. Turns out when he gets to a functional medicine person, they determine that his gut health, his bacterial or his microbiome, which is not just bacteria, is out of balance. Once you fix that, his symptoms minimize, his life returns, he has his optimal health back. So,
and I can only imagine the spark and motivation that personal story gave him to pave this career path for himself as a functional medicine practitioner, to help others. And I'm sure many can relate to that story, not feeling well, and the doctors say, you're just fine. And
you run up a really large medical bill with all the testing and testing and testing, and the inconvenience and the discomfort.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that, because one thing I like about Ruscio is that it's clear, both on his website and throughout this book, that he really wants to provide cost-effective care.
Absolutely.
He doesn't believe in frivolous testing or a one-size-all treatment, or to be on supplements for the rest of your life. In his words, he's progressive but cautious. And I love, he says, he's a reasonable voice that is not anti-medicine, will not make you afraid of food.
Yeah, he calls that non-fear of food.
Yeah.
Minimizing that food fear.
Yes. And he's not going to subject you to expensive or unnecessary testing if you don't need it.
Yeah, he actually wants to help you end up, after you have repaired yourself, with a wide spectrum of foods.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not just the same old routine day in, day out. No, he wants to widen that scope, which I think is very healthy.
I do too.
So he starts off talking about, what is the gut? And in my opinion, he sort of missed the mouth because the mouth has got bacteria in it, and it's really important, the oral cavity. And then the esophagus, he sort of slides over that pretty quickly too, and it's really kind of important. But he gets down to the stomach, which would be the next organ, and then we go to the very extensive small intestine tube, and then that goes into the large intestine, which is not quite as long, and then you evacuate. So you put things in your mouth, and they move through this tube, and what's left comes out the other end. Now, if you're feeling good, it comes out of some sort of consistency that you like. And so that can be, this might be a very interesting conversation today about guts. But you're bringing the outside environment, and when I used to talk about this, the lining of the gut really is the outside world. You have your skin protecting you from external environmental contaminants, but then you have the lining of your gut, because you're bringing the outside world in there. So it's the sensor there to pick up on what you've been exposed to and make decisions about, and it gets colonized by these microbes. And it's just kind of recently that we have been paying attention to sharing our life with microbes, that maybe we're not all human. Maybe we're more microbial than human.
Right.
So that's interesting. But anyway, so who are those microbes? They're bacteria, they're fungus, they're protozoa. And he had a parasitic infection.
Right.
So they treated all the bacterial things, but most of us don't think about fungus and the other viruses that could be in our system that are all healthy.
So true. And you're right, he does kind of pass over the mouth, which is important because that's where we first start to digest carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
But he really focuses on the small intestine.
Mm-hmm.
He has a whole chapter on the small intestine. And
what a big territory.
Well, you mentioned the microbes. So where are the microbes usually supposed to be?
So when you have a well-tuned machine, the bulk of the microbes are in the colon. That is the large intestine. Now, there's a valve between the large intestine and the small intestine. There's a valve between the stomach and the small intestine. So there is a unit. Typically, there's a one-way flow through this system, and these valves shut tight so that things will move in an appropriate way, and they move by smooth muscle contractions that are regulated. And your question was, where are the bacteria mostly? They're typically in the large intestine. Now, there's a little bacteria in the small intestine, but not a lot. It's when you're healthy, and when you're unhealthy, and we call this disruption of the microbes dysbiosis. When that gets disrupted and you get the wrong kinds of bugs and too many, and we call them bugs, they're not really bugs, they're microbes. Too many and not enough diversity, and maybe the wrong proportions, more pathogens, disease-causing bacteria versus the healthy bacteria, the beneficial bacteria. Well, if any of that gets up into the small intestine, it's not built to protect itself against a lot of bacterial erosion. And that's where we get, I think you're going to talk about SIBO.
I say.
What is SIBO?
I call it SIBO.
Oh, SIBO. Okay, thank you. I've never used the term.
But it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that's what he introduces us to in this book, and how prevalent it is, especially among IBS patients. But it is becoming more prevalent. And I think just because we are knowing more about it as well. Because I didn't learn about it in school. I think it's fairly new over the past 10 years.
And that's what he says about when you go to see medical providers who have been to school earlier, they've not been exposed to this, and whether or not they've kept up with the advances in understanding, they may or may not have. So
and at first, too, many providers were in denial, or they didn't believe that SIBO could actually be a thing.
Yeah. But, when you think about the ways that this disruption affects you, there's the fatigue, there's depression, there's brain fog, there's insomnia, there's acne and skin conditions, female hormone imbalances, male hormone imbalances, and thyroid disruptions. This constellation of symptoms is wide. And if people don't know it could be related to their small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they never address it, and they continue with the symptoms. So I think Dr. Ruscio talks about treating the cause, not putting Band-Aids on symptoms. And I think that is so good for people to think about. Let's fix the root cause, and then maybe the symptoms will minimize.
Absolutely. That is a perfect segue. Can I share a story that he has in this book that I just loved this analogy? So he says that the health of the environment that dictates, or that our gut is an ecosystem, right?
Love it, because I'm an ecologist.
Yes. So think of it like this. If you are a gardener and your plants were dying, what would you do? In the Western medicine, the focus is on the symptoms, not what's causing them. In gardening, we examine the environment. Maybe there's not enough sun for the plant to grow or thrive. Maybe there's too much moisture in the soil. So the gardener will tweak the environment so that the plant can be thriving and growing nicely. And Dr. Ruscio says that it's the same approach we must take for the gut health and repair.
It seems logical to me.
Yeah, I just love the gardening analogy. And then he goes into that everybody's gut is different, And just like ecosystems,
there's the one in the Arctic, there's one in the desert, there's one in the the woodland forest that we live in. The ocean is another ecosystem, and none of them are alike.
Exactly.
But there are principles that apply to all of them.
Yes.
And that's what he's doing here. He's applying these ecological principles to our body, and I love it.
I do too. Well, and another thing though is that while they all have the same principles to follow, he points out that, in research or when you look at gut health, you'll find that this bacteria helps with this person. So like in an African society.
The Hasdas.
Yes.
Or Hadzas, I guess that's how you say it.
But
we're all going to eat like they do in that African community, and I'll be healthy if I do what they do. Is that what you're saying?
Well, he advises
against that, doesn't he?
you against that kind of thinking. The more we know about other healthy cultures or people is great, but you can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to do that, because it would be the same as saying, well, the rainforest does a really good job with all that rain. I'm going to bring the rain to the desert. Mm-hmm. The desert doesn't want that rain.
There's no rain in the desert. Yeah. And that was a lot of fun to read. And he has a fabulous chapter about the cultures and food habits in different cultures and how they evolved and how they came to be and why they work for those people, why they keep those people healthy.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because he has a section on the early life influences and environmental impacts that can affect the gut. And he kind of goes into those different cultures or things that happen when we're in the womb or...
Oh, tell me, you want to have a guilt trip? Can we have a guilt trip?
I don't want guilt trips.
I don't want a guilt trip either, but
information.
It's heavy duty stuff here. The responsibility of colonizing a new individual.
Well, yeah, and he even says, don't beat yourself up if
you had to have a cesarean.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you can't breastfeed or whatever. So this is not to guilt or shame anybody, but it is really interesting information.
But what I think is cool about it is by knowing it, by knowing that if I have submitted to a cesarean, that the baby's going to get colonized probably from more, my vaginal microbial area is not going to be, the baby's not going to get it. That would be the first exposure. And so what's the first exposure? It would be your skin, the outside of your skin, which is a different set of microbes, and then it'll be the healthcare providers and other people. But he's telling us that within the first 3 years is when we establish our microbiome. So if we know that you're starting with a little bit of a disadvantage, do something early, and maybe don't use antibiotics early, because that can have an influence on establishing that microbiota. Did you find anything in that conversation that piqued your interest?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear. He said 9 out of 11 studies show that early use of antibiotics are associated with increased risk of asthma, allergies, and eczema.
And maybe obesity, didn't he?
And maybe obesity, yeah. And that he says C-sections are linked to type 1 diabetes, celiac, asthma, and for those reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, but maybe there weren't any corrective, use of probiotics or something that can be, and there can be interventions to help establish a more healthy microbiome for those kids.
And Dr. Ruscio says they are very safe, and they're safe for young populations. Mm-hmm. So the more we know now, we can be proactive if you had to have a C-section or you're not breastfeeding.
And definitely something to follow in the literature as we get more evidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me take it back to another analogy I really liked. Mm-hmm. So he says your body has its own army, which is your immune system, and it defends against invasion or infection. Now, your army or immune system needs practice or training to operate effectively. And this is where he goes back to talk about our ancestors. They were out there making tools, handling animals, and then going to eat, all with dirty hands. And today, we've learned that hand washing is really important, and now there's antibacterial soap.
You say we've learned that, but maybe what have we learned?
Well, so I think it's really important that he says there's a difference between new dirt and old dirt, and that we still need to wash our hands. I mean, we know that washing our hands prevents disease. We know that. But, washing your hands after the bathroom, important. Washing your hands after playing outside in the woods, not as important, right? Because that's where we can get some of that old dirt that has the healthy microbes. So he's just saying, there's pros and cons of being in like our hyper clean environment right
So
now.
being germophobic may be not as healthy as just a healthy balance.
Exactly. And
of hygiene.
Right. I mean, we don't want to go back to the ancestors because they also had a much shorter lifespan.
Yes, they did.
And they died of other reasons. They had a healthy microbiome, but... So I think that was cool how he says we have to train our armies and expose ourselves to some microbes. And that's where the antibiotics come in, because in the early years, under 3, we're developing that microbiota. And if we have the antibiotics, it wipes it clean, and we don't have that kind of training. And then when we're exposed to other things, our body thinks that it needs to attack.
And again, he puts a cautionary statement there, because being a parent and having watched little babies suffer when they can't tell you what's wrong and they're turning red with fever, and someone says, let's give them an antibiotic. How comfortable are we with waiting to see if the baby's immune system will take care of it? But there is a break point where maybe it will override the babies, and it is appropriate to give the antibiotics. So he, like you said at the beginning, he's not saying no to traditional medicine. He's saying look at the functional medicine pathway as long as you can before you go to the interventions with pharmacological therapies.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's important. Yeah.
Well, do you think we're at a break point for this? Because I think there's more to talk about in this book, and I would like to go to another chapter, but if there's, another podcast with it, but if there's another idea here, bring it on.
Well, I can just wrap it up really quickly with a couple other fun facts from this section.
Good.
So he found there was a study in teenagers that if they lived in an area with diverse, naturally occurring plants, that they had a healthier skin microbiota. So that was interesting, just exposure to outdoors and nature. And then what was very interesting to me was the exposure to farm animals while pregnant. That for every additional animal you're exposed to, there was an increased benefit for the baby's microbiome.
So having your dog is a good idea, right?
Having a dog.
Maybe a couple of rabbits.
If you live on a farm.
Put a cow in the backyard. We've talked about that before in another book, but moving on.
And then the last interesting thing that I'm going to implement is that the probiotics in early life the research says it will aid in seasonal allergies. And my children have really bad seasonal allergies right now.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because, I am with 360health4u.com if you want to find me. And I have some products that might be able to help your children with the seasonal allergies, and probiotics are one of them. So I would love to let you try them out.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Thank you. So, yes, they are helpful in seasonal allergies, and I am all about learning about those products. That is some of the really fun facts in the first half of the book. He really lays a good foundation and gives you some interesting research to think about before he dives into the rest of the information.
So let's wrap it up and go to another podcast on another day.
And I'm Kristen Norton with Well Balanced Nutrition. And I love talking about helping you find the right diet that is good for your gut. We are offering a free monthly webinar and a free clarity call. So I'd love to invite you to visit our website, wellbalancednutrition.com, and connect with us so we can help you find the food that makes you feel great.
views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.